Welcome to Law and Justice. I'm Jane Mulcahy, and this is a special series on the topic of how to talk policy and influence people. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Tom Creed, a theatre director from Cork and someone I know going way back. Thanks for joining me, Tom. How are you?
I'm well, thank you, yeah.
So, Tom, as I mentioned, you're a theatre director. Maybe you can tell the listeners and viewers a bit about yourself and how long you've been working as a practitioner in this area.
Yeah, for sure. I guess I discovered the theatre at school, and like many people, it was an inspiring drama teacher at school, followed by the experience of youth theatre as a teenager. I guess that was my route in. And I had studied music as a child, so I did grades of theory and piano, and but I guess I was sort of never interested enough in the piano to be any good at the piano.
Okay.
And then I discovered the theatre as a teenager, and I kind of left the music behind for a while. And kind of by the time, so I did theatre in school and did youth theatre, and then by the time I went to university, I was pretty clear that I was interested in the idea of a life in the theatre. And I had, considered whether I'd go and take a theatre course, like the Drama and Theatre Studies course at Trinity. But in the end, I went to UCC. My father taught there, so that we'd always sort of grown up with the idea that we would go to UCC.
Right.
And also, I guess, there was a kind of good track record particularly in philosophy and English graduates of UCC. So people like John Crowley and Fiona Shaw that we would look up to. So in a way, I sort of thought if an arts degree got them into a life in the theatre, then that might be good for me too. And then kind of would have been involved in student drama, which is, I guess, where we would have met first. And then kind of just before I finished at college, actually, so about 20 years ago, I would have started.
It's not long now.
I know, yeah, it was, so around the beginning of, I guess 19 years ago, maybe probably my first professional gig, and then started working in Cork, with some of the independent companies, was directing my own work, doing box office, was working as a technician, and kind of ended up doing sort of most of the jobs, interning at the film festival, doing a lot of jobs in the arts. I've been sort of maybe super fortunate and maybe also super tenacious in that actually, like, most of the jobs that I've done to support myself as an artist have also been arts jobs. Mm-hmm. And so then would have worked at the Everyman Theatre in Cork, would have been an associate director at Rough Magic in Dublin. And then a kind of parallel area of my work, which is making festivals and working with other artists, kind of emerged. And that came a little bit out of, I think, growing up in Cork, which is small, mm-hmm. and where, actually there's a lot of culture in Cork, but it's also limited. And I guess from quite an early age, I had the idea that I didn't want my kind of ambition and my frame of reference to be limited by what was immediately around me. So I was always kind of traveling to see work, initially to festivals in Ireland, staying with friends who were at drama school in London to see theatre there, going to the Edinburgh Festival. And then kind of later in my mid-20s had the opportunity to Germany and France and Scandinavia and Central Europe also. And kind of discovering other ways of making theatre, and sort of then through kind of being someone who had a lot of experience of seeing a lot of work, I started getting opportunities to work with festivals. So with Kilkenny Arts Festival, I made the theatre and dance programme as part of a bigger festival, and then I spent some years as director of Cork Midsummer Festival in Cork, and sort of just after the financial crisis, which was like not an easy time for anyone to run. But it's also kind of, was my first role leading an organization, and kind of while I would have been a bit involved with policy and various kind of aspects of various kinds of policy and advocacy, I kind of would have my kind of real grounding would have come then. Mm-hmm. I finished in Cork in 2013, and then I guess I had a kind of unfinished business with my directing, which was about kind of somehow connecting to my my music that I'd given up as a child, which was that I was interested in directing opera also. And partly that came from, I think, having the experience of seeing opera productions by theatre directors that I admired, and being excited by the theatrical potential of opera. And I think, so I'd had the experience where some of the best theatre I'd ever seen was opera. Also, much of the worst theatre I'd ever seen was opera. So I suppose I was interested in, what happens when this art form, where you bring all the art forms together and in a way bring various things that I would have done over my life together. So then since 2014, I've been based in Dublin and working mostly freelance as a director, about half in theatre, half in opera, a lot in Ireland, but also I've had the opportunity to make productions in France and in Belgium and in the USA and in Canada, and also bring productions on tour, again in North America, in Europe, and in Australia. So I guess that's sort of my work as an artist. I direct new things sometimes. So I work with composers or with writers on new plays. Sometimes I make productions with the actors. And also more recently now I'm sort of working with old things, so directing Mozart or Puccini or Bach, and sort of actually for me, which is super exciting, and which is about going, what is it to look at these old things from where we are now, and what can we learn about these old things by making them, imagining what would it be if they were happening now, and what can we learn about them through now, and what can we learn about now through them, I guess. Yes. So that's my work as an artist. And then I guess since 2016, I've also been involved with the National Campaign for the Arts as a member of the steering committee. And the National Campaign for the Arts is the sort of voluntary sectoral organisation that makes the case for the arts in Ireland, that makes sure it's on local and national government agendas, that makes the case for the arts. And the National Campaign for the Arts would have come into existence during the financial crisis, in response to the McCarthy report, which obviously was the proposal around how the government would get out of the recession, which involved massive cuts, and particularly severe cuts to the Arts Council and to arts funding, the abolition of Culture Ireland, which had been a big success in the 2000s in terms of supporting a great number of Irish artists to have their work seen abroad, and which was, had kind of been set up with quite a lot of autonomy in a way that kind of international cultural diplomacy hadn't in Ireland had before. And so kind of in response to the McCarthy report, it galvanized the artistic community to come together and kind of make the case for the arts. And I became involved around 2016, where the government did what was seen by the arts sector as a kind of downgrading of culture within government, where Heather Humphreys became the Minister for Fine Gael, but of a department which put culture in with rural development and regional development and a whole range of other things. And in a way, at that moment, usually the moment where kind of people become involved in the campaign is where I think it's usually a kind of a convergence of two things. One, you think enough is enough, and two, you have a little bit of time on your hands.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So I guess I've been involved on the steering committee since then, and have seen a number of campaigns then, pre-budget campaigns where every year we we survey the art sector in Ireland and come up with a list of proposals to government that we'd like to take into account in the budget. Also responding to initiatives as they unfold, and also pre-election activity, where we come up with a series of proposals and we ask candidates to declare whether they support these initiatives or not, and then make this information available to our members. And then also hold hustings where we invite the arts spokespeople of the parties to come and in a live setting present their policies and take questions from the arts community. And so the campaign there's a central steering committee, but then also there are local constituency groups in every constituency around Ireland. So so that in a way we have a direct connection with local politicians and local arts organizations all over the country. And so as part of our advocacy, we can do it at a national level from a steering committee point of view, but also we can draw on the connections and the resources and the abilities of all of our members around the country to make sure that it's a truly national campaign and not just something that's Dublin-centric and Leinster House-centric.
Of course. Thank you for all of that, Tom. That's a great introduction, and obviously I've followed your career with great interest and admiration. And it's funny that you mentioned that, you know, maybe you were lucky in a way, but also tenacious. I think that's absolutely true. You can't be an artist, I don't think, a successful one, without a strong sense of calling and commitment and dedication, you know, and an ability to kind of tune out the noise of people maybe saying, why wouldn't you get a steady job as an accountant? You were always very, or whatever, you know, the kind of the querying looks from people at times. But I imagine a lot of artists would much rather not have to engage with the policy making process, you know, that they'd prefer that they could just do their work, you know, that they could feel supported by the state, that it would be a given that artistic life is valued, and that, you know, if you do it well and you put your back into it, that you would have a living wage, you know, a decent wage, an ability to live well. Do you think that the state has ever made it easy for artists to have a decent life?
Look, I think it is the case that Ireland spends the lowest percentage of GDP on culture in Europe. So the average spend is 0.6% of GDP, and in Ireland it's 0.1%. And I think you know, in a way, the idea of an Irish professional cultural sector is really a 20th century invention.
Right.
Because you look back into the history of Ireland, many of the professional artists, the writers, the painters, were Anglo-Irish. Mm-hmm. And the artists who worked in that kind of cultural industry, in a way, were Anglo-Irish. Of course, there's a kind of vast indigenous culture in terms of traditional music and dance and song and storytelling. But a lot of that was amateur, and a lot of that was in the community. You know, and the kind of major cultural institutions that arose at the beginning of the 20th century, like the Abbey, obviously came out of a kind of cultural nationalism, but also were founded by very Anglo people like Yeats and Lady Gregory. And I think, of course, the Abbey, you know, it's interesting to note that the Abbey was the first state-funded national theatre in the world. You know, so that the country has, in a way, there has always been support for culture, but I think there's always been a sense that culture is the poor relation, and kind of a sense of it being something that maybe like you do it anyway because you love it.
Right.
You know, yeah, and without taking into account that actually it's a major industry in the country. There's at least 23,000 people working in the sector. It's one of the main reasons why people come to Ireland in terms of tourism. The idea of the kind of cultural experiences that for example, multinational companies' workers can have in Ireland is one of the reasons why they relocate here. Of course, there are other reasons as well in terms of, you know, financial reasons, but I think, you know, the idea of this kind of cultural place where people like to come and like to be, and you know, that that state funding is also a multiplier. So, you know, state funding is transmitted into tax, it's transmitted into other spending. You know, so actually that state funding is then, for the culture, is returned to the state in taxation and in kind of all of the other economic activity that happens around culture. But it, you know, I think it certainly is the case that we look at other neighbours in Europe who from a financial point of view certainly value culture more and take it seriously as an industry. And the idea that investing in culture is investing in every aspect of the nation, in the economy, in our identity. We're seeing in education now a real shift from the idea of STEM into STEAM. So the idea of putting the arts among science, in the middle of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, so that our young people are growing up with creativity and with independent thought and with kind of all of these things, even if they're not going to become actors or dancers or painters, that creativity is at the heart of innovation, at the heart of entrepreneurship, at the heart of kind of all aspects of what we do.
Okay. And so you mentioned that the National Campaign for the Arts was kind of spurred or came into being, birthed by austerity, really, and the slashes on board Slip Nua and stuff. Since then, has it been persistently the case that you're trying to claw back what was lost in that regard, pretty much?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, that's absolutely the case. And I think the funding for culture was cut by over 40% during austerity. And we've really only kind of just barely got back to the pre-crash levels of investment at this point. When Leo Varadkar became Taoiseach, the government made a commitment to double funding for culture over 5 years. And in a way, a lot of NCFA's activity over the last couple of years has been trying to get the government parties and the other parties to stick to that. Mm-hmm. It would bring us only part of the way to the European average. We'd still be less than the European average. But for a sector that can thrive and that can really fulfill its potential, would move the sector on from a kind of subsistence state to actually a state where it can really thrive.
And Tom, what have been the reasons that you guys have been given when you've met with politicians as to why we can't match our European neighbours?
I think usually it's a kind of brushing off. I think it's we're different. It's we're
Irish exceptionalism kind of thing.
And I think the just a kind of sense that there are other more important things on the table. And I think from our point of view, the level of investment in culture, when you consider the kind of percentage of the spending that we're looking for, it's really very, very small. And the kind of impact that actually, from a government point of view, a relatively small investment would make such a big difference. But I think that in terms of getting across the idea that we need current investment as well as capital investment, it's all well and good to build a new event centre in Cork City or renovate the National Gallery. And of course, those things are really important. But that actually the current expenditure in artists and in arts organisations through the Arts Council, which is conceived as a state agency at arm's length, so that it distributes funding based on the needs of the sector and its knowledge of the sector, rather than that spending being in a way at the whim of party politics
or whoever. Yeah I get you. And so Tom, we are now obviously recording from our homes because we're all in lockdown due to COVID-19. It's been grim and very difficult for everyone in various ways, but grimmer and more difficult and traumatic for some more than others. And the arts community has been hit very hard, I imagine, by this, with tours cancelled. You're a theatre director, do opera. That is live performance. That requires people to be able to gather en masse and enjoy those performances, as as do live music performances. Tell me about some of the ways that this is impacting on the sector.
Okay, so I mean, in fact, I had a show on in Cork at the Everyman Theatre the day that Leo Varadkar made his speech from Washington announcing that mass gatherings were going to be closed down. So a performance of Beckett with Barry McGovern, the famous Beckett actor, and we've done 2 of our 3 performances at the Everyman as part of a tour. And of course, on the day that as soon as the Taoiseach announced that mass gatherings were going to be restricted, the culture started closing down immediately. So before bars and cafes and restaurants and schools and shops started closing down, culture started closing down. So it was one of the first sectors to close down as a response to the crisis. Within a couple of weeks, just in the sort of 3-month period that we're talking about, so that the mid-March to mid-June period, it's estimated that the loss to arts organisations is 10 million euro. 12,000 arts events have been cancelled, with the equivalent of 2.4 million audience attendances. And the Arts Council has just last week surveyed individual practitioners to also get a sense of how that's affected individuals, because those figures only apply to the organisations that are funded by the Arts Council. So that's the immediate impact. Tours have been cancelled, productions have been cancelled, but also with social distancing, there is no clear sense of when things will open again. What does it mean to open a theatre or a concert venue with social distancing? Somebody estimated that the theatre upstairs at Project Art Centre in Dublin would seat 20 people under current social distancing guidelines. So actually, how do you rent that theatre? How do you make ticketing income? Because of course, government subsidy is only a small portion of how the arts function. It enables artists and arts organizations to raise money from ticket sales, from sponsorship, from other activity. And so in a way, the sector is shut down. Many people are out of work, and there is no clear sense of when this is going to change. There are reports that saying it could be the end of 2021.
So worrying.
Worrying. And, I think what was, along with many of my colleagues, I think we were super impressed by the response of the government in general.
Yes, okay.
To the crisis, the efficiency, the clarity of the communication, the way the public has, in general, really responded to that, and that it seems like we're, potentially coming through the worst, and in a way that, while it's had a great impact, and that many people have really suffered, that it could have been much worse.
Yes.
So I think
and everything, yeah.
Yeah, totally. So I think as what then was very disappointing was to, in a way, have the response from the Department of Culture to the crisis to be pretty toothless, I think, actually. And so they made an announcement a couple of weeks later where they announced that they would advance 90% of organizations' grants for the year, so at least they could cash flow, which was very welcome. But at this point, there's very little new money has found its way into the sector. So in terms of organizations that are dealing with losses, with cancelled events, with artists, individual artists who have lost work, the situation is quite bleak. Of course, artists are workers and actually are not, the art sector is not looking for special treatment. But it is the case that arts workers are often employed in a seasonal way, where in many cases
contracts, you mean, kind of, yeah,
absolutely. And so the COVID-19 emergency payment for self-employed practitioners who've lost work it has been able to make up that. If your work has dried up and you're self-employed on the day when that happened, you can benefit from that payment. But lots of actors and orchestral musicians and technicians, and also all the other practitioners who support artistic work, who often work on POAE contracts. You look at the example of maybe an actor who was employed on a play until the end of February and had another project starting at the beginning of April, but because they weren't in employment in the week before the lockdown happened,
right,
not eligible, they're left behind. And it's not the only sector in which I think those things, these issues apply. Also,
the
think
economy
about,
in a way, isn't it? For a lot
absolutely.
of, yeah.
So you think about the hospitality or the tourism sector, where a great number of people do the majority of their work in the summer, and are able to live on the work that they do in the summer, potentially during the year, in the same way that many, a lot of the arts work that happens in Ireland is at summer festivals. So in a way, the work that people do through the summer can support them for the rest of the year. So I think those practitioners are being left behind, the artists and the arts workers, who are employed in that way. There have been some initiatives that have been proposed, and the Arts Council have made a fund available where small grants are available for artists to make new work in isolation and distribute it online. But of course, that's only applies to artists who are able to work that way. Like if you're a poet who can read your own work, or a painter who can put your work up on the internet, or a singer-songwriter, that's fine. But if you're an opera singer that needs an accompanist, or a director who doesn't write their own text or perform their own text, so I need actors and writers to work with, that it's very limited in terms of the people who can really avail of it. And it also completely leaves behind all of the arts workers who are not maybe the main creator of the work. You compare it to the equivalent fund in the UK, where Arts Council England announced grants of a similar level, but specifically to make up for lost income, or for reflection or research, or thinking about what you might do afterwards.
Much broader.
And it's interesting in this crisis because, of course, like in a way, culture is getting us through it.
Yes.
Like everyone's at home, and people are watching television and reading books and listening to music, and streaming live performances of music and theatre and opera from all over the world. But ordinarily, those artists would be making an income and making a living from that work. And so while everyone is at home consuming probably more culture than they ever do in their normal life, the artists are left wondering how they're going to pay the rent. And where every time the Taoiseach makes a speech and quotes Seamus Heaney, you go like, the next Seamus Heaney is sitting at home. Wondering how they're going to get through this. And anyway, so I suppose from the National Campaign for the Arts point of view, we're looking for a stabilisation fund. We're looking for the government to invest the resources that to ensure that we have a cultural sector when we come through this.
Yes.
And acknowledging the fact that the cultural sector might be one of the last sectors back. In terms of, if you think about, 1,500 people sitting in the National Concert Hall shoulder to shoulder, many of them might be older people. How does that work with social distancing? And I guess we're also looking for resources so that artists and organizations can plan, and different kinds of planning. So, it's interesting to think, what's the kind of art that might come out of this situation? Like, are there ways that we can, perform with these kinds of technologies? But that needs time.
Yes.
And in the same way, I think, it's, I read a piece by Fintan O'Toole in the Irish Times a few weeks ago, where he was pointing out that, after the Spanish flu pandemic in the late 1910s, we had the Roaring Twenties. We had a decade where people were hungry for physical connection and culture and being out in public. And so the the arts sector at a time where it has really no other way of raising any other income, because um, because ticket income has dried up, and also all of the other work that artists might do to subsidize their work, whether it's working in the hospitality sector or working in offices, or all this kind of work has also dried up.
Yeah.
So how do we plan for all of the extraordinary culture that everyone is going to want after this? Like everyone sitting at home watching theatre and film and listening to music, and really wanting to be back out there at festivals and in theatres and in concert halls. So we're really making the case for that kind of investment.
Yeah. You basically need something so that you can be kept safe and certain enough to actually create.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But in a way, we're not looking for special treatment. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
We're just looking for, in the way that the government, different sectors have different needs, and that we need the needs of the cultural sector to be taken into account, and a plan to support that sector through the crisis, this sector which employs so many people and provides so much inspiration and entertainment and for so many people, so that so that there is still Irish culture when this crisis passes.
Yes. And as you rightly mentioned, the arts, all the arts, are so important to really our understanding of the human condition and meaning making. And they're going to be crucial in getting out of this and looking at psychological harms, relational issues that might impact children or whatever. There's going to be untold consequences, and theatre will be amazing in this. I'm sure music will too. So it's in all our interests to buffer artists, I think, as we want to buffer the elderly and other vulnerable at this time. Have you gotten much support in recent days and weeks from politicians that you've been talking to, or have you been lobbying in that way with Sinn Féin, the Greens, Social Dems, Labour, whoever, trying to get not just the two major parties who look like they're doing a deal, but everyone else on board to have you in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, we held a public meeting last week, which was our most attended meeting ever. Like over 380 people attended a public meeting on Zoom, and yeah, I moderated that meeting, and like moderating a meeting with 380 people on Zoom is
you can add that to your CV, Tom, as one of your new talents.
Well, it's totally, and I discovered that I have transferable skills, because there's something about directing opera, which is about looking at something and holding so many things, in your mind,
tableau, at
the same time, that actually, like, moderating large Zoom calls is not entirely dissimilar. But we really have a mandate from the sector to demand support. And so, yeah, we've been engaging with the arts spokespeople of all the major political parties. Campaign members all over the country have been engaging with the newly elected TDs and senators to make sure that our 7 key points are on the agenda, in terms of the parties that will go into government and also the parties that will go into opposition. And for me, the kind of the advocacy going in many different ways. So there's a kind of, obviously, this social media campaign, people writing directly to their politicians, opportunities in the media. We've got kind of had substantial print and radio and television coverage nationally and also locally over the last while. And I think, it's that kind of advocacy where we needed to be going at every level, so that it's so that we're, of course, we're advocating to the politicians, but also that we're making sure that the public hears the case and are reminded that this cultural sector that they love and that they engage with to such an extent, needs the, we don't need the same level of support as the health sector, of course, but in terms of the kind of well-being role of the cultural sector, and not to mention the economic impact and the number of people who are employed, the amount of tax that they pay, and all of these things, that we can be strong and resilient. And before this crisis happened, 72% of artists in Ireland were earning less than the national minimum wage. 72% of artists and arts workers didn't have a pension. 48% of arts workers didn't have health insurance.
It's a precarious life at the best of times.
Totally. And, at the same time, more people attend paid arts events in Ireland every year than attend GAA championship matches.
Wow, when you put it that way, Tom, that's amazing. That can't be ignored. Like, that's crucial as a fact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in a way, I think one of the things that also we need to find a way of supporting is up-to-date data and up-to-date research that we can use in this advocacy. We draw on a kind of range of reports commissioned by the state agencies like the Arts Council, academic research, research done in other countries. There's a beautiful statistic from a report, happiness study that the London School of Economics did, which is that 4 of the top 6 happiness-inducing activities involve the arts and culture. The other 2 are exercise and sex.
There you go. Yeah.
But participating in culture, taking a class, going to a performance, that in terms of happiness and in terms of how we, the kind of inspiration that we need to get through this crisis. So the sector, the sector is doing everything that it can with already with not enough resources, and the difference that a relatively small investment would make, it could really make the difference between there being a cultural sector after this and there not being one anymore, and there being closed art centres all over the country, and a generation of writers and musicians and actors who have to stop, and then there will be no new Seamus Heaney for the Taoiseach quote in the next crisis.
Yeah. Wow, that is unbelievably sad thought, and hopefully, apocalyptical. It's kind of like, how would life be worth living beyond COVID-19 if that becomes a reality with the grim economic prognosis overall? Do you have a figure? Can you quantify what you need the state to invest, Tom?
So we're calling on the state to investing an additional 20 million this year, which actually is all we were looking for anyway, to bring us on this 5-year plan to double arts funding by 2025. And so I think we need 20 million to make up for losses and to also ensure that that planning can be done, and then also that we need a commitment to the same investment for next year, so that organizations can really plan. And I think we've also called for the government agencies to engage with the sector, so that they can really provide what the sector actually needs, rather than trying to guess that. And actually, we had a meeting with many of the key people in the Department of Culture on Friday, which was, actually really open, and we really opened a dialogue with them. And then we, with other partner organizations, with various different art form resource organizations like Theatre Forum, with Equity, the Actors Agency. We hosted a webinar on Friday to let practitioners know about the various supports that are available, the COVID payment, various kinds of unemployment payment, rent support. Also these meetings are really important for us as a way of, from our isolation, seeing people's faces, and actually being on a call with 200 or 300 or 400 colleagues reminds us that we're all in this together. Yes. And that if we speak with one voice, then I think there's a there's a possibility that our needs will be answered.
Yes, well, we can certainly only hope. Just one final question, Tom. Thank you so much for your time, and I really wish you very well with this campaign, because I truly think it won't be worth it, you know, to come out the other end and have everything shut down. We need the arts, and I do hope the politicians will wake up. And 20 million is nothing; it's a drop in the ocean, really. But from my own interest in recent times about trauma and interpersonal neurobiology, so how our experiences and relationships impact on our behaviors. I've learned that things like singing, like dancing, drumming, dance and theatre, that they're all regulating to the nervous system, and that they also help people heal from trauma. Do you think that we need to, just in general, invest more in primary schools and secondary schools in these types of activities, so that they're not just a nice middle class privilege, you know, but that everyone can have access to them, Tom?
Yeah, I think it's crucial, and I think organizations like Music Generation, which supports music education all over the country, the Arts Council and Creative Ireland's Creative Schools initiative, which are being rolled out, are vital. And actually, they need to be rolled out more. This activity needs to be happening in every school, in the same way that this activity needs to be happening for adults also. And I think there's, we have extraordinary artists whose practice is rooted in communities also. And which is both about working with those communities so that they can have the experience of making culture, and then also working with those communities so that their stories are represented. And I think in this kind of extraordinary, uncertain time, so many Irish people are doing so many extraordinary things. And what we need to make sure now is that the artists, the storytellers, the poets, the painters, the actors, the musicians are able to pick up where they left off once the pandemic passes, and tell those stories, and tell those stories of resilience and of all of suffering, and of all of the things that we do. Because I think there's the idea that the arts and culture are a way of us getting to know ourselves and getting to know other people, and to not be alone, and to realize that other people have had the same experiences as us. They're like a kind of mirror, and also a way of of kind of dealing with hard times, and of distracting ourselves, and kind of all of these things. So to make sure that we can tell the stories of these time when it's past, that's what we need to be able to do, and that's we need to have the conditions in place, as soon as these things pass, that we can go on.
Yes. Well, look, you put it beautifully there. You summed it up fantastically, that to continue with meaning making and holding up that mirror to us, you need to just be helped to get through this in one piece, as a collective, as a group of artists. And I certainly hope that will be the case. I've every confidence, actually, that it will. It has to be. So, Tom Creed, thank you so much for talking to me about arts policy and about your hopes for the investment that's needed, really, at this point. The rest will take care of itself. You're creative people. You'll be doing what you do on Zoom and elsewhere. But you do need the people with the deep pockets, even though they're getting less deep by the minute, to just throw you a lifeline for now. But thank you for talking to me. Good luck with the rest of the campaign. This was How to Talk Policy and Influence People, a Law and Justice special, and I was talking to Tom Creed, theatre director and extraordinaire policy advocate at this time. Thanks so much, Tom.
Thanks, Jane.